Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition. I am Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith, and we are ready to break down this 4-game NBA DFS slate over at DraftKings. Obviously, not as intense of a slate as yesterday, and we have Thursday Night Football coming up too. We'll put out a show for that as well to help you. That is the goal across the board, to help you win. And if we do help you in any way, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. Get that out of the way now so you can help us and we can keep helping you. All right, so this is a 4-game slate. There's a lot of injuries on this slate, actually, for only 4 games, and we'll hit them as we go through it. Let's start position by position. Start at point guard. Luka Doncic comes in with 11.2 price tag, and I think he has the highest projection of the entire slate. Yes, he does. So obviously on a 4-game slate, fading Luka, and there's 2 other really nice studs to consider. It's going to feel a little bit dicey, but so far this year, fading Luka has worked out pretty well. He just has not been getting it done. Houston, exactly the easiest matchup either. So let's just start with a conversation on Luka real quick. He's coming at 18% ownership. So on a 4-game slate, going over on Luka is a bit appealing. Where do you stand there?
I'm probably not going to be over. I think this slate has a lot of good mid-range value. And, you can always pay up for Luka. You can always pay up for Giannis. I think Harden's going to be pretty popular on this as well at a cheaper salary. I don't see Luka as a must. If I was playing one lineup, it would probably not include Luka. So I'll still have him. I'm going to play a 20 max. He will be in some lineups, but it'll probably be around or under the field on him. I just don't really see the need to pay all the way up as a necessity.
Yeah, I mean, as things stand, the guy to play for the Mavs is Kyrie. I mean, he's only 7.5K. He's projecting pretty well. He's been the better player when you compare prices on the year. He's just been more effective from a fantasy perspective. But really the best play possibly of the entire slate, certainly when you look at the top guys when it comes to salary, is James Harden. He's way too cheap for what his role is right now. He is absolutely crushing it, averaging 52 fantasy points per game, which puts him right on par with the top studs in Giannis and Luka for the slate. So, he is going to be owned, but I don't really care that much about that. I think that's just a good spot to eat chalk at a severe discount. At this point, for what his role is and what he's doing, he probably should be closer to 10K. So I just feel like that is a play that I want to get to. Kyrie, like I said, he is a really good play too. He is also going to be pretty chalky just because he's still so cheap. But I find it difficult to get away from Kyrie as well. You could get different by kind of splitting the ownership and pivoting from Harden to someone like Dame. So that is in play. And then you also still have Ja Morant at point guard too. So if you're moving away from Luka, how are you feeling about Harden and the chalk? How are you feeling about Kyrie chalk? And if you're not into those guys, where are you going at the position?
I'm into Kyrie quite a bit. I think, like you said, he's too cheap. You can play him at shooting guard, which makes him a little more useful on this slate. I like Dame a lot as a pivot from Harden. I think the ownership's going to be really skewed. Like, Harden projects better, as he should, but it's Dame. It's a 4-game slate. You never know. Memphis is allowing the second most threes per game in the league this season. Small sample, but that's kind of what Dame does. So good spot for him. I like that quite a bit. I don't hate Morant as an even lower owned pivot. The only issue with him is his minutes have been pretty low. He's been dealing with, I think, a hip injury. He played last night through it. I guess we'll even see. He might not even play. We haven't gotten their injury report yet. So there's, I guess, a chance someone like Ja would take the second half of the back-to-back off. Booker's on my radar a little bit. Not super high on him. And Fred VanVleet is actually my highest owned player at this position, 7K flat. He's been pretty brutal. His shooting has been non-existent, but the role's there. The minutes are there. This game has a pretty tight spread. VanVleet just looks like another guy who's underpriced at 7K flat.
Yeah, I love the FVV call. Just monster minutes. And he's doing everything he normally does. Like you say, he's just not really hitting any shots. If he actually hits some shots, he's going to crush that 7K price tag. Morant is tough, man. He hasn't cleared 30 minutes in a single game this year. So as far as talent and price and ability goes, projection goes, he's appealing because he's not going to be owned. But unless we know for sure he's in and going to get 30, 35 minutes, that is a tough sell for me. Devin Booker is just like a price play. Devin Booker, anytime he's under 9K, is always on my radar. But on this slate, I just don't think it's an absolute necessity. How about value here? As far as value goes, obviously Scottie Pippen at 5.8K, Scottie Pippen Jr. rather, will stand out if Ja sits, but I don't know if that's for sure. The only other guys that really make sense as far as value right now, just because there's no big injuries on this slate, would be Chris Paul at 5.9K and Keontae George at 5.7K. George has been pretty erratic and just disappointing overall on the year, but honestly, for as weak as he's been, he's shooting under 35%. For as weak as he's been, he's still top 22 fantasy points in every game. In his last two, he has 31 plus fantasy points. So a matchup with the Spurs is not scary. And we know he can do a little bit of everything. So he's another guy like FVV. If he actually starts hitting his shots, Keontae George at 5.7K is going to pay off pretty quickly. He's carrying 15% ownership. That is not that bad on a 4-game slate. And a slate, there is going to be some value possibly depending on who ends up getting scratched here. But I think he's one of my favorite value plays on the slate, especially when you factor in he's not that owned.
Yeah, he should be more popular. He's underpriced. I think he's like Utah runs a weird rotation, but he's generally pretty safe for minutes. So 5.7, I'm getting to him quite a bit. Tyus Jones in the same range at 5.4, routinely playing about 30 minutes, now starting for Phoenix. I like that game in general. Pretty tight spread, decent enough total for the slate. Every game looks okay, like from a spread standpoint. I don't really have to think about blowouts tonight, I don't think. So Tyus I like quite a bit. I think Chris Paul, if he's going to be overlooked in that range at 5.9, is perfectly fine as well. Utah runs at a fast pace. They've been a pretty good matchup all season. So we'll see what happens with Ja. Like Pippen will be obvious, like chalk in that range. But if that just makes guys like Jones and George and Paul even lower owned, then I'm still happy to get to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now that value at point guard is just split between those three guys, really. They're all hovering around 11 to 15% ownership. So as we get closer to lock, I would just play the ownership game there and kind of side with the guy who's getting a little bit overlooked out of that trio. But if you just look at it in a vacuum, Keontae George would be my favorite play in terms of value at point guard. Moving on to shooting guard, obviously a lot of these guys are going to carry over to shooting guard, so we're just going to focus on the ones that we have not discussed yet. Of the ones we have not discussed, Jalen Green projects the best, and he's not carrying any ownership. I don't really like him at 7.7K, but we know he does have a ceiling. Just is he going to hit his shots or not? That's the question. Bradley Beal is questionable. If Bradley Beal is in at 6.6K, I think he's an okay play. That's a good price for sure for a guy who has a decent role as part of a big three. If he's out, I would have a little bit of interest in Grayson Allen. Is he actually shooting guard? Yeah, he is. All the way down here, 4.5K. He's an okay value off the bench anyways because he has good usage off the bench. He only played 12 minutes in his first game back from missing a game. So just if we can get any clarity as to if he's going to get more minutes off the bench or whatnot, that would be good. But if Beal is out, I wouldn't worry about that at all. I would just imagine we can count on 20, 25 minutes for Grayson, and then he maybe would even start. But yeah, we can get into the mid-range and value here as we go. But at shooting guard, where are you going up top? Are you going to go with somebody we've already touched on, or is this a position you think you want to save at?
Kyrie is the one I still want the most here. I mentioned you can play him as shooting guard, and because point guard is so stacked, I think it makes a lot of sense to do that. So he is my highest owned shooting guard as of now. Norm Powell looks good. Like otherwise, I think it's kind of a saving position. Like you can play Green or Booker, but not super high on either of them. The mid range is pretty stacked here, though. Norm Powell, I mentioned, 5,600 starting, second on the team in usage so far. No Kawhi, so he's an interesting play. Gary Trent has been horrible. He's shooting like 30% with 12% usage. Doesn't really do much else, but like I said, Memphis has been horrible in terms of defending the three-point line. That's really what Trent does. I think it is a good bounce-back spot. Another guy who's guard forward eligible. Jordan Clarkson started over Sexton in the last game. Still played around 25 minutes, but he did see usage up in the 30% range. He's only 5'2", shooting guard only. I think he's a great play. And then someone who I think will be overlooked is Klay Thompson at 5'7". Another guard forward eligible play, reasonably priced, has a good role. Pretty scoring dependent, obviously, with Luka and guys like that doing a lot of other stuff. But if Clay is going to be under-owned, I think he's pretty good as well.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. Any interest in these Spurs values?
No, I don't have any Spurs at this position, actually.
You got Castle, you got Champagne. I think they're okay at 4.4 and 4.7K against the Jazz. That seems viable on this slate. Unless or until more value opens up, they're at least going to stay in my player pool because they're projecting as reasonable values. But yeah, I like the Gary Trent call a lot. Eventually he's going to catch fire. Only 5K, projected for 32 minutes. And right now looks like one of the best values on the entire slate.
I think my favorite in that 4-5-ish range is actually Dylan Brooks, guard forward eligible as well, going to play 30+ minutes. Doesn't do anything, but he's not any worse than someone like Champagne. So I think Dylan Brooks is fine too.
Isn't he? All right, moving on to small forward. Moving on to small forward, we got Lowry Markkanen up top with a 39-point fantasy projection. Nobody comes within 9 fantasy points, so this is a waste. He is questionable. I was going to get to that. So that is something to talk about for sure. Obviously, if he's in, he's pushing for almost 40 fantasy points against the Spurs. So I would like him at 7.8K. I don't have a problem with him at all. Obviously, he might be out, so that point might be moot. Obviously, we talked about Bradley Beal. His projection's pretty weak, and he might not play. So there's that. As things stand, if those guys aren't in, Norm Powell probably looks like the best, safest small forward play on the slate. But if Markkanen is actually out, then we are looking at some Jazz value. So the first two guys that would make sense would be Cody Williams, the rookie, who can directly be used at small forward at 4.1K. He played 30 minutes last game, 17 fantasy points. I don't know how much we can trust him. That was his best game of the year so far. But if Lowry is out, he would probably play quite a bit. And there's also Kyle Filipowski, who is 4.7K, played 25 minutes in his last game, and he had 27 fantasy points. So both those guys would be in play. I would just lean to whoever would get the start over Lowry. So that's where I am there. And then we're still talking about the same guys: Klay Thompson, Gary Trent, Powell, who I mentioned already, and then your boy 4.4K Dylan Brooks. It's all looking kind of the same. So I think where I'm at right now is probably just I'm playing Norm Powell at one of those spots, and right now it looks like small forward because small forward's pretty freaking gross. And then if Lowry's out, I do want to play one of those guys that would be getting a lot of extra minutes.
It's worth noting that in addition to the jaw thing that we don't know about, Bane and Smart also got hurt last night.
Yeah, that's true.
Doesn't seem like they're going to play. If they don't, John Conchar, I should have mentioned him at point guard. He's small forward eligible. You're definitely playing him at small forward because this position, like you said, is really bad. He's 3,800. The guard forward eligibility is useful. I think he's a really good value, assuming he would start if Bane is out or Smart is out. So he has a path to minutes. I'd rather play him than someone like Cody Williams or other guys in that range.
Well, by the way,
Prince.
By the way, though, remember that dude broke his leg for the Jazz.
Yeah, that's why he started the last game.
No, I know. What was his name?
Taylor Hendricks.
Yeah, so he's gone. So these guys are they're probably looking at run anyways. At least one of them will. So with Taylor Hendricks out and Lowry possibly out, I mean, I'm going to double down there and say the Jazz value looks even better than I initially thought. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of all the same. Like all these cheap guys are pretty unappealing. Taurean Prince, Gary Trent, Derek Jones Jr. I think is a pretty good value. Another guy you can play either forward spot, routinely playing 30+ minutes for the Clippers. You can play Clay here. Harrison Barnes is kind of the same play as Derek Jones Jr. I think he's fine. Dylan Brooks, Keldon Johnson looks a little overpriced to me, but this looks like a pay down spot. Like if Markkanen's out, there's literally no one to pay up for. So
right,
that's really all you're doing.
Yeah, so you might as well just go into the night assuming Lowry's out or just not even caring because there are other plays kind of in the same price range as Lowry anyways. All right, so moving over to power forward, obviously you can use Lowry there too, but leading the way is Giannis Antetokounmpo with a 56-point fantasy projection, second to only Luka on the slate. He is carrying 22% ownership, but that feels low for a 4-game slate. So him and Luka, it's the same story we talked about before. you could definitely entertain going overweight because obviously it looks like the majority of the people are going to live in the mid-range. It's nice to live in the mid-range, but it's also nice to get one of these studs at sub 20 ownership when they go for 90. So that is the appeal there. So let's start off with just Giannis and talk about him. He is probable to play. He's been probable basically every game. Are you feeling different about him compared to where you were at with Luka? Like, do you want to be overweight on him, or are you just again going to double down with kind of going almost studless on this slate?
I do like the balance build, but if I am paying up for someone, it will be Giannis. He's cheaper than Luka. Point guard is just a position with a lot of opportunity cost. Power forward, not so much. There are quite a few good plays here, but the matchup for Giannis, I think, is also a bit better. Memphis runs at a decent pace, not an elite defensive team necessarily. Giannis is Giannis. So if I'm paying all the way up, it will be for Giannis over Luka. I think he's a fine play, but there is other value. Like I said, I think Durant at 8,600, he's routinely playing like 40 minutes a game. I have no issue with him, especially if Bradley Beal's out. He'll see more usage. Jaren Jackson, given those Grizzlies injuries, Jackson himself has been a little banged up, may not play more than 30 minutes, but if Bane sits, that's a lot of usage to go around. He's 7,400. Don't think a lot of people will go there. So if you're playing an otherwise chalky build and you're looking for someone to kind of differentiate with, I think Jaren Jackson is pretty intriguing.
Yeah, he's also too cheap, 7.4K, so I like him quite a bit. Jeremy Sohan is good value at 5.8. Bobby Portis, you're talking about the Memphis Grizzlies not being able to stop people from shooting threes. Portis could get hot here at 6K. Another guy I really, really like is PJ Washington at 4.8K, one of my favorite values of the entire slate. If those Memphis injuries stand, Jake LaRavia is also another guy that we could be looking at 4.6K, but Washington is too cheap at 4.8K. Guy plays 30 plus minutes a game. Just routinely overlooked when the Mavs have, three guys in Luka, Kyrie, and Clay that the defense focuses on a bit more. But yeah, so I think it's kind of both, really. I mean, you can pay up at power forward, or you can drop all the way down. I think PJ is just a nice guy to slide in at like the forward slot on DK. Just too cheap in my book. So, anyways, how do you feel about him?
PJ and Sohan are probably, PJ and Sohan are probably like core plays on this slate. They're both power forward only, which is kind of limiting, but Sohan's been excellent. Playing point guard this season has done a lot for him.
He also plays like 30 plus minutes like every game too. So
he leads the team in minutes per game, and Wemby's been fucking garbage. So someone's got to do something for them. Sohan's pretty good stat stuffer. Washington just too cheap, like we said. Portis, I don't mind that as a shout. 6K flat. We know he has a ceiling, and there's not really a lot else in that range, like Jabari Smith, but he's been pretty awful as well. So not a lot to get excited about overall.
All righty, let's kick it over to center and wrap up there. Giannis obviously can be used there, but we already talked about him. Victor Wembanyama has a little bit more ownership than Giannis does, but he's $300 cheaper, and he honestly has like the same projection. He's been absolutely terrible from a DFS perspective. He did have one nice game where he had 54 fantasy points, another one where he had 29 real points but didn't clear 50 fantasy points, and he has two absolute garbage games. One time in 4 games has he topped 30 minutes on the year, which is not encouraging if you ask me. So I just don't want to pay for him at 10.4K. Obviously, you can always play Wemby. He projects well. But I just if they're going to continue to limit this guy's minutes and he's just not going to play really well, I just don't want to do it. That said, the Jazz are a really good matchup. So this is certainly a get right spot if you're looking for one. So I'm not going to tell you not to play Wemby. He's coming in somewhat chalky for a 4-game slate for a reason. But my favorite play is going to be Zubac. He did disappoint yesterday. He only had scored 6 real points. But I mean, that's going to happen sometimes. 6.5K for a guy who's had a massive role and just was absolutely crushing his first 3 games. I mean, that's just another dude where you're looking at guys like Kyrie and Harden and some of these other dudes and just okay, they're owned, but where's my path to fading them with confidence? I don't have much. He's pushing for 40-point fantasy projection. The only negative about Zubac is that he's going to carry ownership. I think with all the value that is, possibly going to be trickling out with these injuries, we can get different without fading these really good, plays. So Zubac is awesome. And then I will also note Şengün at 8.5K. That is too cheap for what he can do. If I'm going to pay up at center, Şengün would be my play, I think.
Mine would probably be Wemby. Just going to keep going back to the well. I assume eventually he's going to round back into form. He can't continue to be this bad, even though his game is quite frustrating to watch. It is a good spot, like you said, so I do Wemby a good amount. Still prefer Giannis among the super pricey guys, but Wemby looks good to me. Zubats, great play. Obviously, chalk for a reason. Good chalk, I think, in this spot. I like the Mavs centers. Gafford and Lively are both cheap. Lively's more minutes than Gafford per game off the bench, but he is the more expensive of the two. I think both are terrific plays. Would not play them together in the same lineup, but individually they're fine. Don't mind Lopez. Don't mind Kessler, kind of in the mid-range. Both are decent per minute historically. And I'm not really getting the Şengün. It's a little scary. I don't know what's up with him. He hasn't been that good so far this season either, but obviously the upside's there and the prices come down a little bit.
Well, 2 of the games he had to contend with Wemby. So I think that explains a lot of it. His first game of the year, he had 66 fantasy points. That is what I'm talking about as far as like too cheap for a guy who can get you like 70. Okay, so obviously you're saying the same thing, but about Wemby, which I don't disagree with. That's why I'm saying, like, I don't want to tell you to fade Wemby just because he's been bad. The Jazz are an amazing matchup, and he projects incredibly well. So nothing wrong with Wemby. It's just like the same logic with Şengün. He's been okay, right around 40 fantasy points in 2 other games. He's had 1 bad game. So at 8.5K, I think it's a pretty good price, especially if he's not going to be owned. That's the big thing for me, that he's not going to be owned. All right, that is going to do it for us. I can barely finish talking here. Got the mother of all tickles at the moment. But thanks for tuning in. Hopefully we helped you out. If we did, give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel so you get alerted to more videos just like this. We try to do NBA videos every single day. We're going to pump out a Thursday night video pretty shortly too, so we can help you with that tonight. All right, thanks for watching and good luck.